So what I did earlier with the children was intended to be the reading as such, but if you want to follow what we're looking at, you find that passage in Matthew chapter 22, and it's verses 1 to 14. So it's Matthew 22, verses 1 to 14, if you want to pull it up on your phones, or if you've got the Bible, it's page 990 in the Pew Bible. We will refer to some of the verses as we go along, so you might find it interesting to look at that. So we're familiar with the story. A certain king arranging a marriage for his son. Now, anyone who's ever arranged an event, who's arranged a wedding or anything of that nature, will know that a huge part of the process is arranging the invitations. You could get everything else right about the day. You know, you could have the best musicians playing, you could have the best food available for your guests, and so on. But if you don't get the invitations out in time and get that right, then the whole thing could be ruined. It could be a complete disaster. So in our story, the king has his servants go deliver invitations, hand deliver invitations to his selected guests. But nobody seems terribly keen to come, remember. Now, usually being invited to a wedding is a great thing. There might be times where you maybe don't feel quite like it, but when you're there, you enjoy yourself. I think most of us are like that. It's nice to be invited to something like that, nice to be thought of, and nice that someone would wish to share their big day with you. But these ones who have been invited, these invitees, is that a word? I don't know. The ones who receive the invitations are less than enthusiastic about it. They're less than enthusiastic. And so the king sends out more servants, and this time he lets the guests know just what's on offer. I guess he's thinking, well, maybe they don't know how great this is going to be. And so he lets them know. You would hardly think he would need to, but he does. And they still turn him down. There's going to be good food. There's going to be the best of food. Everything's ready. Everything's prepared. Everything you could want out of an occasion such as that has been catered for. But that additional information doesn't seem to move the needle any, and it has not generated any more interest on their part. And they choose not to come. And in fact, some are very rude about it, ignoring the invitation, brushing it off, and in some cases, we're told, turning in anger upon the servants who go to deliver the invitations, which is quite horrendous. And you think, oh, well, how, that's a hard character to engage with. Who could be like that? Well, of course, there's plenty of people like that. As an experiment, if we were to go out into the streets of Inverness this afternoon and invite people to come to church next Sunday, I think we would get a range of reactions. Most of them would be probably the little miss I'm not listenings, but you might get a few angry and choice words coming in your direction too. So there's plenty of people out there, even in a culture such as ours, which has been for many centuries was a Christian culture. You'll still find a lot of hostility to God's invitation. So I think you can readily relate to that character. So they're not coming, and they're quite insistent upon it. But here's the thing, folks. The banquet is going ahead regardless. The banquet is going to happen. God's got it prepared. The wedding's still on. Regardless of whether these people choose to accept the invitation or not, the party's planned. The king will hold his celebration, and there will be guests at the table. When his son, and of course, we're talking about Jesus, the king, his son, Jesus, and his bride, the church, when they're married together for eternity, on that day, when they are unified and are one, there will be guests there, and there will be people enjoying that. And it will go ahead. And so he instructs his servants to go out into the highways and the byways and offer the invitation to one and to all. We're told in the scripture, to bad and to good. That's something that people often struggle with, the idea that someone could be a bad person, and they could be at the king's banquet on that day in heaven. Well, if that person receives the invitation, with all their heart. If that person is willing to put on the wedding clothes and receive from the king, then most certainly they can be there. What does it say in the old hymn, the vilest offender who truly believes? That moment from Jesus, a pardon receives. It's true. So to the bad and the good, he goes with his invitation to one and all, to people of all kinds, from all sorts of backgrounds, all nationalities, and so on, until the guest places are filled up and the banquet hall is teeming with folk. And so it is with the gospel invitation. Jesus is saying here to the people he was first called to go to his people, to the Jews. He's saying to them, look, there's a time coming when this invitation will go beyond you. It will go far and wide, to Jew and to Gentile alike. And in the parable, it seems that there is a good response to that wider invitation, doesn't it? There's a real take-up amongst the world out there. And this reminds us, I think that this should remind us that we shouldn't write anyone off. And there may be people that we think they would never be interested in what we've got to say about Jesus. That could be not true. They could be the very people that God's working on. I think we should always bear that in mind. You know, there's people we write off and they think, oh, well, they don't want to hear about our story. They won't accept an invitation to church. You don't know. You don't know who God's working on and in. So I don't think we can write anyone off in that regard. It's really interesting when the invitations go wide, all sorts of people are coming in. Bad and good are there, and all people from all sorts of backgrounds, are rich and poor and everything, are coming in to the banquet hall together. But the story doesn't end there. All the guests have arrived for the wedding celebrations, but this is the bit that I find most intriguing. This little encounter with our chap there, remember, the tracksuit. It says here, verse 11, when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. Friend, he asked, how did you get in here without wedding clothes? The man was speechless, we're told. And then the king told the attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen. The king spots a guest who's not dressed appropriately, who's not wearing the correct wedding garment, and he questions the guest, how did you get in dressed like this? And also probably taken aback that the man should even think that he could get in dressed like that. And he has no answer to it. He doesn't seem to have any excuse or explanation or whatever. He just says nothing. He's got nothing to say for himself. But the king's not going to allow it. It's not appropriate. And it seems that this presumptuous guest has offended the king. And as a result, we're told that he's seized on the king's instruction. He's thrown out of the wedding. Now, you might think, that seems a tad heavy-handed. But consider that this guest had been invited to the wedding of the son of the king. This is not just your average party. This is not even just your average wedding. It's not any old wedding. It is the wedding. And he's not dressed and not prepared for it, and seemingly not all that interested in being so. But he wants the food, I guess, and he wants the drink, and he wants the good stuff that will come with it, but there's no effort gone into it. He doesn't seem interested. His attire betrays his heart. It's quite clear that he's there half-heartedly. It's quite clear that he doesn't have a great love for those that have invited him. He's not there to honor the son of the king. He's only there for what he can gain. He wants the blessings of the king's court, but he doesn't have any respect for the king and doesn't want to put himself out in any way, it seems. He wants the blessings without the obedience. He wants the meal ticket without any work on his part. Augustine supposed that perhaps the guests received their clothing as they went in. Not so much special wedding clothes, but a clean set of clothes for the special occasion, at least. And it seems that this man has refused to put on that wedding garment. So we get the sense that if he's correct, if Augustine's correct in his interpretation of this passage, in this parable, it means that not only has the man been invited, but the king's going to pay for his kilt, or his suit. The king is going to pay for, the king's providing the wedding clothes. And he still refuses to put it on because he thinks he's fine just as he is. And he doesn't want the hassle. Becoming more like Jesus, becoming like the Son of the King and fitting in a sense with the Son of the King means nothing to him. When the Prince of Preachers, Charles Spurgeon, was asked about this wedding garment, he responded as in his style in a sermon. And in that sermon, he said that it would be possible to examine that question of what this wedding garment was, what it was referring to. He said you could examine that endlessly. You could question it theologically and doctrinally and debate it endlessly. But Spurgeon concluded, and he reflected, that if Jesus himself wanted it to mean one specific thing, he would have said so. And he doesn't. Instead, Spurgeon argues that it represents anything that is indispensable to a Christian. So the wedding garment represents anything that is indispensable to a Christian, but which the unrenewed heart, which this man clearly has, the unrenewed heart, the heart that doesn't love God, the unrenewed heart was not willing to accept. It represents anything that is indispensable to the Christian, but the unrenewed heart was not willing to accept. So you say, well, such as, help us let's try and understand this together. What's going on here? Anything that's indispensable to the Christian, but which the unrenewed heart was not willing to accept. Well, Colossians might help us in this regard. Colossians 3:12-13 speaks of clothing ourselves with compassion, clothing ourselves with kindness, clothing ourselves with humility, clothing ourselves with gentleness, and clothing ourselves with patience, for example. And these are just some examples. Some of these things are indispensable to the Christian, but which the unrenewed heart is not willing to accept. They don't want to change. The person with the unrenewed heart doesn't want to change. And not just their clothing we're talking about, but their heart. They don't want change. They think they're fine just as they are. They think that God should accept them as he finds them. But I think it's in Ephesians 4 that we find the best fit, if you're part of the band, the best fit for the analogy that Jesus uses here. I think it's Ephesians 4 that really helps us, because listen carefully to this. So I tell you this. This is verse 17, Ephesians 4, verse 17 onwards. So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they're full of greed. That, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self. To get off the scabby old shirt and just get rid of it. Put it off. Get shot of it. You don't need it anymore. It's not part of who you are. And I'm going to get tangled all up on a thing now. But you get shot of it. It's not for you. It doesn't matter to you anymore. Put it off. Put off your old self, which has been corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. I think Ephesians 4 really helps us to understand this parable and what this wedding garment is referring to. That is not the way of life you learned, the way of impurity, the way of greed, the way of indulging in our own pleasures, the way of sensitivity and all these things. That's not the way of life that you learned when you heard about Christ. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self and put on the new self. created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. You see, these guests who put on the garment were transformed in the process. They had exchanged their day-to-day dirty old rags, and we're all dressed. Before God, we're all dressed in dirty old rags. All of us, sinners. They put it off and they receive this clean outfit. And in that sense, they represent those who have been touched by the grace of God and who have turned to God in repentance. And having been welcomed by God into the kingdom, they're now clothed in the righteousness of Christ, made worthy of a place at the table. Remember, God said, those I invited first, that the king says they didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve it. But those who are at the table, they deserve it, but not because of anything that they've done or anything that they are, not because they're special in any way, but because they've received from the king. They've received the grace of God. They represent those that have received the grace of God and are clothed in the righteousness of Christ. And those people will come from all over. They'll come from all walks of life. There'll be some that are sitting in our prisons this very morning who'll be there on that day at the table. There may be even some who are engaged in the violence around the world, perpetrating acts of tremendous cruelty, who may well be there on that day. Such is the wonder and the power and the scandal of the grace of God. We will not be able to imagine who will be there on that day. But I hope that you're with me and you want to be there to see. There will be a variety of folks, some good in life, some who have been not so good in life, some all different from all the countries of the world, the different corners of the world. But when they enter that royal kingdom and are clothed by the king, they are transformed. They're all guests with equal status and equally loved and valued and honored by God. And they are willing to honor the king and his son. And as a result, they're fitted out and they're kitted out and they're seated at the banqueting table. And the difference between them and the man who's thrown out is their attitude towards the king, their love for the king, their appreciation of the invitation. Their appreciation of the invitation. And I think that is at the heart of all of this. That man didn't want to change. He didn't appreciate the invitation, really. He wanted to take advantage of it, but he didn't appreciate it, and he didn't love the king, and he wasn't thankful, really, for the invitation. But those who will be at the table will be those changed by the invitation, changed by their encounter with the king and his son, and they'll be enjoying that. That man just wanted things from the king and wasn't willing to give anything in return. But those who will be at the table won't be so arrogant, won't be so rebellious, will have put on the wedding garment, will be clothed in the righteousness of Christ. There's a little sort of poem or little rhyme that goes like this. It says, if you come to God as a braggart comes, in the pride of your own way, then the God of grace will hide his face and send you empty away. If you come to God as a beggar comes, with the plea of your bitter need, then the King of Kings will give good things and make you rich indeed. You can't go to the wedding with the same scabby old tracksuit you've been wearing forever and a day still on. You can't keep living to please yourself. The invitation to come to God doesn't work like that. There has to be change. You have to be changed and get changed. You have to be open to that. You have to be willing for that to happen. And you have to desire that that would happen because you don't want to be walking around in these filthy old rags anymore. You see, the invitation to come to God is not exclusively for one group of people or one other group of people. It is to be proclaimed to one and all. It's inclusive of people of all different backgrounds, genders, nationalities, races, and so on, the reach of the gospel has no limitations, but it is exclusively for those who are chosen, as verse 14 says, in our text. Those who will wear the wedding clothes are given those clothes by the king. So they were invited, and they were prepared, and they were kitted out by the king. And that's where the exclusivity comes in. You can't sneak in the back door. You can't bribe your way in by gifts. You can't just saunter in your filthy old rags. There's a process, and there's a way this happens, and it's all by the grace and the love of the king. So the table's all ready. It's finished, Jesus said on the cross. It's prepared. The preparations are done. Salvation has been secured, and now the invitations are going out. J.C. Ryle, in his commentary, he puts it like this. He says, the Father is ready to love and receive. The Son, ready to pardon and cleanse guilt away. The Spirit, ready to sanctify and renew. Angels are ready to rejoice over the returning sinner. Grace is ready to assist him. The Bible, ready to instruct him. Heaven, ready to be his everlasting home. One thing only is needful, and that is that the sinner must be ready and willing themselves. So are you? Are we? Which character are you? Which part will be yours in the story? Are you even listening? Are you still awake? Are you too busy, whether it's making millions or making ends meet? Because that can be the case, rich or poor. Are you at war with God? Is it time to make peace? Are you resistant to change? Are you stalling Jesus at the front door? Keep him at bay, not ready to let him in. Because you know once he's in, he's going to throw out that old wardrobe. You're comfortable in those clothes perhaps, but he's going to throw them out, and he's going to fit you out in his style. So are you ready? Which character are you in the story? Because you see, all of us must respond to the invitation in some way. Some people will be like those who refuse the invitation to come. The things of this world they think are more important, and they think the things of this world are better by far than God and all that he might invite us to. They could not be more mistaken. Some think that their work, their worldly affairs, their preoccupations in this life are more important than their souls. Again, they'll laugh off and ignore the invitation, but they could not be more misguided. And then there are others still, that chosen few, who know there's nothing special about them. There's nothing great about them. They're not more important than the king or the invitation that they've received. And they're thankful, and they're humbled by the grace of God, and they're overwhelmed by his love, and they receive the invitation, and they are willing to let him smarten them up and fit them out for the occasion, and they're eager not to miss out on the good things the king has planned for his guests, and they could not be more blessed. So which character are you, and where do you fit in this story? What will be your response to the invitation today? Because it's there for you. Amen.